For the first time in 160 years, the skies of Rokor were graced once more by the long-forgotten comet, Exelon. Its ice-blue tail painted a shimmering scar across the heavens, visible even through the cracked ceiling screens of the underground city of Threx. But there was no one left on the surface to see it. Rokor had not always been a world of tunnels and steel-buried domes. Once its skies were blue-green, its oceans danced in reflected starlight, and its cities stood proud, spires of silver and glass, humming with innovation. The people of Rokor had been on the brink of becoming a spacefaring species. Some claimed that, had things continued, they would have reached the stars within mere decades. But that future never arrived. It began with a triumph: waste management. The surface cities had grown beyond what landfills or atmospheric recycling could handle. So they came up with a brilliant idea, or so it seemed. Massive orbital drills, known as gravitons, were built to channel industrial and biological waste deep into the planet's molten core. Out of sight, out of mind. It worked. For nearly 400 years, pollution disappeared, disease levels dropped, cities expanded, the oceans cleared. Generations lived and died, believing they had mastered balance. But the balance had shifted. The planet's core, once a swirling dynamo of molten iron, began to slow. Subtle anomalies were the first sign. Scientists noticed the weakening of the magnetic field. Auroras became dim. Solar flares that once bent away now began to kiss the upper atmosphere, seeding radiation into the air. GPS systems failed. Birds stopped migrating. Then came the earthquakes. Not the usual tectonic shifts, but deep, slow quakes, groans from the planet's very bones. The magnetic field collapsed completely. Compass needles spun like mad things. Satellites began to fry. The atmosphere thinned as solar radiation battered it day after day, bleeding it into space. By the time they realized what had happened, that the waste had choked the outer core, halting its convection, it was too late. The skies turned violet. The oceans began to evaporate. Crops withered. Surface life became impossible. The final exodus was not heroic, it was desperate. Now, they lived in buried sanctuaries of steel and sorrow, shielded from the death above. Underground generators recycled oxygen, harvested geothermal heat, but it was a slow death sentence. Supplies were finite. Air was stale. Birth rates fell. Entire cities went silent, their populations starved or suffocated in the dark. And the comet Exelon passed above, a cosmic bystander, too distant to care. Besides the once-in-a-lifetime appearance of Comet Exelon, something far more critical stirred beneath the dying world of Rokor. In the subterranean command chamber of core facility, the air was tight with urgency. Massive screens flickered with thermal readings and seismic data. For the past 4 decades, the planet's greatest minds had poured their remaining resources into a single desperate plan: to restart the planet's core by detonating a chain of specialized thermonuclear bombs at calculated points around the molten boundary. It was their final hope. And it began today. At the heart of the project stood Chief Engineer Silaran, silver-scaled and stoic, who had lost 2 sons to the radiation storms during the last surface evacuation. Beside him was Dr. Yovi Tren, a brilliant but fatigued geophysicist who hadn't left the core control bay in 38 hours. Young operator Nelik hovered nervously over the detonation console, barely of age, but too gifted to be left out. "This is it," Silaran growled, watching the countdown initiate. "There's no reset button after this." "All seismic calibrations aligned," Dr. Tren confirmed. "Trigger sequence armed. May the planet forgive us." Nelik's hand trembled as it hovered over the activation key. 3, 2, 1. The core detonations ignited in a chain. 6 blasts across tectonic fault lines thousands of kilometers apart. The underground cities felt the force ripple through the crust. Entire caverns shook, lights flickered, sirens wailed, dust rained from ceilings. For a moment it felt as though they had only hastened their own destruction. Then came the readings. "Core movement detected," shouted Dr. Tren, her eyes wide. "It's spinning," whispered Silaran, gripping the console. "It's actually spinning!" Cheers erupted across Threx. Technicians embraced. Silent prayers were muttered. Families in the lower domes wept with joy. The magnetic field readings, dead for decades, spiked faintly back to life. "I want to feel sunlight," Nelik said quietly, eyes glistening. "Real sunlight, just once." Silaran placed a hand on his shoulder. "You will, we all will, soon." For the first time in generations, hope surged through the veins of Rokor. Talk of rebuilding the surface began to echo through corridors that had only known despair. Children were told bedtime stories of green fields. Some citizens even returned to the old skylight chambers, watching Comet Exelon trace its slow arc across the void, as if to welcome them back. But it didn't last. 3 hours later, alarms blared again. "The core's slowing," Dr. Tren murmured, frozen. "Momentum's dropping." No, check the fault data. Maybe it's a delay," Silaran said, already knowing the truth. One by one, the readings fell. The core movement ceased. Silence returned. Not the relieved silence of hope fulfilled, but the hollow silence of another death sentence, made crueler by the brief taste of salvation. Sobs echoed through the control deck. One technician collapsed to the floor, pulling at his ears. Nelik's hand hung limp at his side, still near the trigger that had almost changed history. "It wasn't enough," Dr. Tren said, her voice breaking. "The explosions, they stirred it, but couldn't sustain it." The dreams of sunlight turned to ash once more. Underground, in the bowels of a dying world, despair took root again. The cheering had long since died. What remained was silence, bitter and familiar. But it was broken again, this time not by hope, but by horror. Inside the orbital observatory chamber, buried levels below the surface, a new alert blinked red across the monitors. Dr. Tren, eyes hollow from sleeplessness and heartbreak, blinked at the screen in disbelief. She ran the simulation again. Then again. "Impossible," she whispered. The core team gathered around one by one as the projection traced a massive arc through the system. The course of Comet Exelon, the celestial visitor they had once admired with what little hope they had left. It was no longer a visitor. It was on a direct path to collide with Rokor. "Trajectory shift confirmed," announced Nelik, voice barely a whisper. "Comet Exelon is inbound. Impact in less than 48 hours. Silaran stood still, his fingers curling into fists. "How? How could it change direction?" "Gravitational slingshot," said Dr. Tren grimly. "The third gas giant in our system, Zythex. Exelon must have been pulled in tighter on its return loop. No one expected it. We weren't even watching for it. We were too focused on the core." Someone in the control room laughed, not in amusement, but in despair. The sound was jagged, broken, the kind made when all sanity finally gives way. "What kind of joke is this?" the technician gasped between mad giggles. "We kill our own planet, try to save it, and the gods toss a rock at us to finish the job. What's next? Locusts? Firestorms? Have we offended the stars themselves?" All eyes turned to the monitors. Exelon was massive, its icy body the size of a small moon, trailing a tail hundreds of thousands of kilometers long. The speed alone ensured that when it struck, it would not simply damage Rokor. It would end it. The calculations were merciless. The impact would collapse the crust. Every underground city would be turned to rubble. Even if the core had been restored, it wouldn't have mattered now. The comet had become the planet's final executioner. Panic erupted across the subterranean networks. Families screamed, officials argued, citizens flooded temple halls long abandoned, supplies were looted, riots sparked. The idea of escape, of evacuation, was a fantasy. There were no ships, there never had been. They were trapped, and they knew it. In the dimly lit sanctum of the Dome of Ellerin, an old priestess named Helia knelt before a rusted shrine of the old gods. She had not spoken in years, but now her voice returned, soft, cracked with age. "I do not ask to live," she whispered, eyes closed. "I do not beg to be spared, but if there is any mercy left in the stars, let there be a sign, a miracle, something." Her prayer hung unanswered in the air, just cold stone, just silence, because they all knew the truth, even if they dared not speak it. No miracle was coming. Rokor had been dying for centuries, now it was simply being buried. The countdown to death ticked past zero. The moment of impact had come. Underground cities braced. Families clung to each other. No one screamed. There was no point. They simply waited. Then, a low rumble. Lights flickered. A tremor rolled through the tunnels like a long exhale. Dust spilled from ceiling corners, but the world remained. No explosion. No inferno. No end. Just silence. Then the seismic monitors lit up. "Surface breach detected," shouted Nelik. Dr. Tren stared at the incoming data. What in the stars? It didn't impact. It landed. The command deck erupted with confusion. "Landed?" That comet was traveling at hundreds of thousands of... "Check visuals, now!" Surface cameras, long dormant, blinked to life. Through the grainy feed, they saw it. A massive object, shaped like a comet's core but unmistakably artificial. Segments of its icy shell peeled away like flower petals, revealing structured metal, glowing arrays, and thruster pylons. "It's not a comet," whispered Silaran. "It's a ship." The words spread like wildfire. "It's not a comet. It's a ship. Something's inside. Someone's inside." An incoming transmission crackled through the comm system. Static. Then a clear voice, calm, unfamiliar, and strangely warm. "To the inhabitants of Rokor, we mean you no harm. We apologize for the dramatic entrance. Comet disguise protocols are standard in high-risk systems. Request permission to approach your central entry gate." The old priestess Helia dropped to her knees and whispered. They answered. The sky, it answered. Children clutched their parents. Elders knelt in disbelief. A scientist sobbed and muttered, "We are not alone. We are not alone. We were never alone." Gasps echoed through the underground chamber. "They're at doorway Sigma," said one of the techs, voice shaking, standing, waiting. The feed shifted to the massive underground gate. There, amid ash and dust, stood 4 bipedal figures, broad-shouldered, wearing sleek, matte black suits with faint blue lines glowing at the seams. They walked like beings that had no reason to fear death. With a sound like mountains shifting, the colossal doors began to part. The figures stepped forward, crossing the threshold into the heart of the Rokorian refuge. Are you the gods?" the old priestess Helia asked. The human leader stepped forward unmasked. His face was not monstrous, but open, the face of a friend you had somehow always known. His voice gentle, his words unforgettable. "No, we're human. We come from a world called Earth. Silence." The name meant nothing at first. Human. A sound, alien and plain. But it would not stay that way. The human continued. "We keep watch on those still finding their place among the stars. Your planet's decay was noticed cycles ago. We intended to remain observers until your actions caught our attention. The attempt to restart your core was bold and brave." Dr. Tren stepped forward, trembling. "So you saw us fight for our world. But what made you cross the stars to stand here?" "To help," the human replied simply. "Because you held on." Most civilizations in collapse don't die from the disaster itself. They tear each other apart first. Panic, violence, division, they devour themselves before the planet even finishes the job. But you endured. You adapted. You fought to the last breath. You clung to hope even as your skies fell. You prayed for a miracle and earned one. We saw a dying world, yes, but more than that, we saw survivors. You showed the galaxy that you deserved a second chance. Tears streaked down Dr. Tren's face. Silaran looked around at his crew, the exhausted, bruised but unbroken people who had stood against time, death and silence, and said quietly, "Then let this be our first day." The humans carried a small device, no larger than a cargo crate, a shimmering, crystalline core stimulator, pulsing with incomprehensible energy, and within an hour it had been lowered into the very heart of Rokor. The moment it activated, seismic readings spiked, but steadily. The core began spinning, and this time it did not stop. Stronger than before, sustained, alive. Screams of joy echoed across the tunnels. Citizens poured into the old transit halls, laughing, crying, hugging strangers. The lights burned brighter, the air tasted sweeter. The Rokorians who had forgotten the concept of hope began to weep openly. Inside the central dome, Silaran looked at the human leader. You saved us. You saved yourselves, the human corrected. We just gave you a push." Dr. Tren, still stunned, asked, "Why do you even care?" The human's face turned serious. "Because that was us once. Dying on a rock we ruined. We had no one to save us. We climbed out anyway. And now, we don't let anyone else fall if we can help it." He stepped forward. "You are not just survivors anymore. You are not alone. Welcome to the galaxy, and if you'll allow us, we will walk with you, share knowledge, build with you, protect you." Then one voice rose from the crowd. "Humanity!" The crowd joined. "Humanity! Humanity!" It echoed through the domes, into the comm channels, through every hall and chamber. A chant, a prayer, a name given weight. The humans looked at one another, almost embarrassed. "We're not gods," one of them said with a grin. Priestess Helia, standing beside them, eyes glistening, whispered, "Maybe," she added, "but you are what we thought gods would be, and you'll have to forgive us if we treat you like one." Above them, the comet ship rose, scattering ash into the winds of a waking planet. The skies of Rokor would soon shine blue again, Not because of gods or fate or mercy, but because humans showed up.